With that, I'm going to actually get started on my presentation. So I'm going to talk about the state of the Puppet community. So I'm Dawn Foster, if you haven't figured that out already. I'm the community lead at Puppet Labs. I've been doing... In the meantime, I'll use this one. It's not nearly as loud, is it? All right. That's all right. I'll just keep talking and see what happens. So anyway, so I've been doing open source and community stuff for, I don't know, a dozen years, 13 years, something like that. Before I joined Puppet, I came to Puppet Labs in September. The end of September at the conference is where I started. Before that, I was the community lead at Intel's Open Source Technology Center. I've done various things throughout the years. So I'm new to Puppet, but not new to open source community management. With that, let's just, gratuitous lolcat picture agenda. I'm going to talk about how I define community, which maybe is a little bit different than the way some people talk about it. I'll talk about some guidelines and code of conduct. This is similar to what Eric talked about a little bit at the very beginning of his presentation yesterday during the welcome. And I'll talk about some components of the Puppet community, what we're doing to make it easier to contribute. This is a big focus for me personally as community lead. I'll talk about metrics, and we'll talk about some of the plans. Oh, thank you. We'll talk about some of my plans for 2013. So I'm just going to keep talking, and then somebody will... I'll switch off the mic in a minute. So community definition. So my definition of community is maybe broader than the way some people divide it. So I look at community, especially for an open source project, to be all of the people who work on the project. That includes contributors, so developers, release managers, it's on the bottom, the red button. You just hold it. Okay. All right. You good? Much better. Thanks, guys. Thank you for the batteries. Okay, so community definition. So release managers, quality assurance, localization, which is something that we don't really do now, but should. We're kind of talking about that. Other developers, people who write applications around it, modules, extensions, if you're talking about other projects. Users, these are incredibly important people, and I think in a lot of open source projects we tend to forget about the users because we focus on the developers. I'm as guilty of this as anyone else. Vendors, lots of companies and with products and services around the open source project that provide support for the whole ecosystem. So we've had a number of people here up on the stage who do consulting around Puppet, for example. And they're a particularly important part of this community in a variety of ways. Then there's all sorts of other stuff, people who answer questions on the mailing list. They promote Puppet by speaking about it at, DevOps conferences, other conferences, documentation, lots of other things. And some of these people contribute for fun. Some of them actually do this as part of their employment at a specific company. But all of those people are part of the community. So throughout the rest of this whole presentation, when I talk about community, I'm talking about all of this and all of these people in various ways. We also, this is one thing that I put together when I joined Puppet, was we didn't really have any community guidelines or code of conduct. And a big part of that, honestly, is because this community really, for an open source community, is incredibly nice and generous and polite to each other, especially in contrast to some others I've worked on. Won't won't name any names. But so there wasn't actually a real need for this, so we didn't put this together because we were seeing issues in the community. We put it together just as more of a proactive way to set our expectations for how we expect the community to continue to behave, which is important when you have a project that's growing as much as Puppet is and as quickly as Puppet is. So these are not particularly earth-shattering things, but we've built it based on kind of 4 principles. Being nice to each other, being respectful, polite, no abuse of other people who are different from yourself. This is important. And we just like nice people. It's fun to participate in a community where people aren't yelling at you all the time. It's kind of cool. So we expect that. Encourage diversity and participation. So participation from everybody, and make everyone feel welcome, even though they may not know what they're doing. They may be new. We'll get them there. Encourage that participation. Keep it legal. This one's kind of obvious. And then stay on topic. And this is more important in the online channels. But making sure that you're posting your question on the right mailing list. You're actually searching for answers to the question before you post it, because for the most part, somebody's probably already answered it. And then we have specific guidelines for various tools. So we have specific expectations around the mailing lists, which in this case are Google Groups, around IRC, various different things. So you can see all that, the URLs at the bottom. If you go to docs.puppetlabs.com, you'll see a link for the community stuff. We also, like every other open source project I've ever participated in, we have all kinds of elements of our community that are spread out all over the place. So in this case, we have Forge for our modules. We have Google Groups where people can ask questions on the mailing list. We have a new site called ask.puppetlabs.com. I'll talk more about this, but it's a kind of a Stack Overflow sort of site that you can use to ask and answer questions. And I think it's a good thing for the people who aren't as comfortable on the mailing lists. We have, of course, IRC. Everything's in GitHub. We have user groups, pugs, bug tracker, Puppet camps, gratuitous picture of pugs. You can thank Rommel for that. I'm not sure if he's in here, but that was from the Barcelona users group. The social media stuff and PuppetConf. So we're going to do another PuppetConf in San Francisco. I think they're going to announce it fairly shortly, but it's going to be in San Francisco kind of end of August-ish. So we'll have another conf then. And then there are probably other things that we kind of brainstormed this morning to see if we're forgetting anything. I'm sure we are, because there are little elements of the community spread all over the place. As I mentioned before, we do have this new Ask site. This is kind of what it looks like. It's a basic Q&A site. Like I said, it's very similar to Stack Overflow. It's actually built on top of a package called AskBot. But you ask your question, people can vote it up, people can answer it. But it's nice because one of the reasons we did this is so people who've been doing open source for a long time are perfectly comfortable on IRC and mailing lists. So people who are newer to open source are not always as comfortable on mailing lists and IRC and feel a little more comfortable having something like this. There are other people who like the fact that they get karma and points for answered questions, and that for some people that's important. So we wanted something that was a little different from the mailing list, which gives you another place where you can ask questions. But one of the things I really like about this is because our mailing lists are all in Google Groups. When you do a Google search and you use the site /puppetlabs.com to get answers just from the Puppet Labs site, you don't get any of the stuff on the Google Groups. So having this on the Puppet Labs domain actually gives you a better way to do a Google search that's going to return results from the Ask site, from our docs, from the rest of the website. So I think it sort of integrates things a little bit better. But this doesn't mean nothing's changing about the mailing list. There are lots of people who are will continue to use those and are more comfortable with that, and that still continues to be our primary communication channel as well. So the mailing lists continue to be really important. This just gives people another way to ask questions. Puppet camps, you guys all know about these, but what I wanted to highlight was just the sheer number of puppet camps that we're doing. We had something like, it was over a dozen puppet camps scheduled in the first quarter. So we've already done Puppet Camp Silicon Valley. We did one in Sydney last week. We have, coming up, we have one in Stockholm, one in Melbourne, and one in Oslo. Those are all next week and the week after. And then there are a whole bunch of other ones, so I'm not going to read through those, but you can see a few of them there. What I really want to highlight, particularly to this audience, is that I am really actively looking for speakers for a lot of these puppet camps. So if you're interested in speaking at any of these, we have CFPs open for a lot of them. Some of them we've already defined the agenda, and the CFPs are closed for a few of them, like the Italy one is closed, but most of the rest of them, with the exception of the ones in the next 2 weeks, the CFPs are open. So I would encourage you to take a look at those and submit talks. I can tell you because we're doing so many of them, if you submit a talk, your chances of it getting accepted are pretty good, because we're not getting a lot of submissions for some of these, especially in some of the more remote areas. So submit talks. Puppet user groups. So I mentioned these earlier. We have some user groups. I really would like to see more user groups. It's one of the things that I want to focus on in 2013. And in a lot of cases, having these puppet camps in various places, hopefully we can also get people to start user groups there. Some of these are more active than others. The Barcelona users group, which I mentioned earlier, that's where I got the Pelican picture. They just started, I think 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago. It was shortly after LinuxCon Barcelona. I went over there and we did a meetup, and we had, 15 people or so, and most of them were locals, and they started getting together to form a user group after that. And so they've been, reasonably active for a couple of months. But anybody can start a user group. I actually put together some tips, so you can see in the Learn More section there, the URL talks about what you need to do to start a user group in your area. It's incredibly easy, and it has some tips for keeping the user group going and keeping it active and getting speakers and that sort of thing. The other thing you should look at, if you have a user group that's not particularly active, look at some of the puppet camps and when we're going to be in town for those, because there's a good chance we can get you some speakers for your user group as well. We're doing that in, and not just puppet user groups as well, but DevOps, other things. So in Stockholm and Oslo in the next 2 weeks, we're also doing user group meetups while we're there. So I think Andy and Henrik from Cloudsmith are going to present at both a it's a Ruby user group in Stockholm, and then a DevOps one in Oslo. So if you see a puppet camp, you can feel free to ping me, and we might be able to find you a speaker for your user groups as well. The other thing you can look at is our training page. So we do a whole bunch of puppet training classes. And if there are puppet training classes in your area, there's also a good chance that you can get someone to speak at your user group. So lots of tips like that in the on that URL. Let me back up. Does anybody have a user group for Puppet that's not on this list? Okay. Just curious. Puppet Forge. I'm going to talk a little bit on the next slide about what we're actually doing with the Forge in 2013. This just gives you some year-over-year comparison. So in the past year, the Forge has grown tremendously. We have over 830 modules. Lots of people with user accounts. So those are not necessarily users, but there are people who have created accounts on the Forge, presumably to do something there. So upload a module, something like that. And then we get lots and lots of downloads on those. So this is where I've had lots of conversations with people over the past couple of days about Puppet Forge. So there are a lot of people who are really frustrated with Forge right now, because the experience for getting your module up on the Forge is less than ideal. But we actually have a team of people who are really, really focused on making this way better. We have the API. I know that people have been talking about having an API for Forge for, I guess, a couple of years. We actually have it. I've seen it. We're using it in some internal stuff. We're still doing some testing and making sure that it's going to scale before we open it up to everybody. So I can say that the API is really, really close. It needs a little bit of documentation the last time I saw it, and we need to actually get it published as soon as we can confirm that it is actually going to scale and not cause any issues when we make it live. So despite the fact that people are a little bit jaded about, we've been talking about this mythical Forge API for a very long time, but now we actually have it. It's just a matter of getting it out there and getting it published. We're also really focused on tighter integration with other tools. We really do understand that until we get this integrated with the tools that developers actually use to create their modules and maintain them, that we're not going to get a good critical mass of modules up on the Forge. So we know that we need integration with things like GitHub, for example. We also need better search tools. So anybody who's searched for a module knows that you really can't narrow it down very well. You can't, tell it. You can't search on metadata. It's just kind of a general search. So we're looking at putting some better search tools around that next year as well. And then just more visibility and recognition for modules. They've done a little bit of redesign on the site so that you can better see which modules are getting the most downloads, which modules are newest, things like that. So that's going to be a big focus for us. And then we're also really focused now on open source contributions. So this has been, we've been focused on this for a long time, but we're starting to devote a lot more resources to it. So for a number of years, it's kind of been whoever had time to get to pull requests, which meant that we're responsive to pull requests at times when, we're not leading up to a release or, when everybody else is busy with something. So we do have several teams devoted to our open source projects. So Andy, for example, is the engineering lead for Puppet open source. We have people devoted to Razor, and Collective, PuppetDB, Factor, and other projects. So we do have whole teams of people devoted to the open source project. That's not going to change. And we have specific people who are dedicated to working with contributions that come in through the open source community. So Jeff McCune, for example, you've probably seen him being a lot more focused on pull requests recently. So he's working on taking pull requests in from the community and getting those merged back into the main code base. And then he's also been focused on better communication about the status as well. And then we have a recent hire who starts next week, and this is an open source support engineer. So this person's going to be focused on bug triage, answering questions, kind of support of people who are trying to contribute back to Puppet. So we have him starting. We're also hiring an engineering lead for Factor, which we don't have a devoted one right now. And we have a few others that are, I guess, in the works, but we can't talk about yet because people haven't quite accepted jobs and stuff like that. So we do actually have, so we have these teams of people who are focused on the open source products, and then within those teams, we have people who are focused very specifically on the contributions from the community. So hopefully we can get ahead of some of those pull requests and make a little more progress there. One of my personal focuses for this year is making it easy to contribute to Puppet. So I've spent an awful lot of time with lawyers over the last couple of months, but the result of that is that we now have a trivial patch exemption for which no CLA, no contributor license agreement is required for certain types of contributions. We didn't have this before. So if I noticed a typo in the docs, for example, and I wanted to just submit a pull request and fix that, that required a CLA, which is ridiculous. So this is a summary. If you actually go to that URL and look at the whole trivial patch exemption, this isn't exactly what it is. In general, if it's fewer than 10 lines and introduces no new functionality, it's probably going to be considered trivial. However, there are some exceptions to fewer than 10 lines. So for example, if you're doing major refactoring on like white space or variable name or something that really is trivial but is going to impact a whole bunch of lines, that's still trivial. So we have exceptions to that first 10 lines. So these are more of general guidelines. And this becomes increasingly important as we have more and more people who are merging in requests. So for example, on Razor, Tom from EMC is one of the main contributors to that project. He's one of the main maintainers. So he needs to be able to, to look at these exemptions and be able to use them as well. So these types of policies are going to be increasingly important. We're also working on a better contributor license agreement process in general. It's going to take the form of a new application. Right now, we got all kinds of problems with the way that we do CLAs. They're built into Redmine, which was fine when all of our projects were actually using Redmine. Razor is not, so it's using GitHub Bug Tracker, and a lot of our smaller projects are also using GitHub Issue Tracker. So having it specifically built into our Bug Tracker is not necessarily working for us anymore. It's not tied to GitHub accounts, so all of the contributions come in through GitHub, and then we have no way, and he's laughing in the front row here, we, interestingly enough, have no way of telling whether or not the person who submitted the pull request is actually the person who submitted, who signed the CLA, other than manually being able to match those two up. And we also want to make it easier for people to sign both as an individual or as a company. So if you have a startup, you're doing a ton of Puppet stuff, and you just want to click through a company CLA that covers all of your employees, we're going to have a way to do that, which we didn't really have a way to do before other than submitting a paper copy and then us trying to figure out who works for you and who doesn't. So that's going to be coming in March or April. I have a contractor who's started on this already, and we're making some pretty good progress on it. So that's something that we're pretty focused on. Now I'm going to transition into metrics. So this is the other big thing that I've done since I started at Puppet, is we actually publish, and you can see the URL there at the bottom, but we actually publish metrics once a month. They go out on this URL. I do a blog post around them. We'll talk about some ways that I want to improve the metrics as well, but we'll talk about some of the things that we're gathering now. This is kind of a summary, and I do sort of a 6-month comparison, so I'm not going to, there's a whole bunch of numbers I'm not going to read them, but you can see that, basically participation in the community has increased quite a bit over the last 6 months. And this is sort of a running 6-month comparison. So next month, once January is over in the US, which I guess is probably about now, I'll go back and I'll do the numbers this weekend while I'm at FOSDEM and run the numbers for January. And then, in the first week of February, we'll post numbers that have metrics for January, and then the 6-month comparison with August. So that's kind of the way that works. And we focus on a lot of different things, the mailing lists. I'm going to add the Ask site to this as well. It's not in the summary right now, but it will be shortly. We look at Forge, we look at IRC, we look at our bug tracker, and then we also look at forks and watchers of Puppet on GitHub. We have 4 primary mailing lists that are community mailing lists. Puppet users and Puppet dev are the 2 biggest ones. And you can see the participation in these and who our top participants are. This is for the month of December. So you can see who's participating. Obviously, people need to post more on Puppet dev, because if I'm number 6 and I'm not doing any active development, I see that as something wrong. So maybe we'll work on that. And then we also have Razor and the uncollected user list. You can see who participates there as well. And like I said, I do this every month, so you can go back and you can look at previous months and see who was participating as well. This is actually, the next 3 slides are not actually part of our typical metrics gathering process, but I was chatting with Jeff yesterday, and I think I'm going to start pulling this. I need to get it worked into the process and everything. But But these are our contributors to Puppet over the past year. So you can see the people who have contributed as measured by the number of commits to Puppet in the past year. And again, thanks to Jeff, we have the pretty version. So you can see the big bubbles of the people who actually contributed the most code or made the most commits to Puppet. And then we also have an all-time view with Luke at the top. And so he's still, if you look at Puppet all-time, Luke still kind of rules the total number of commits. But we're working on that. We're replacing his code. No, it's good. So this is the all-time view. It's kind of fun. So thanks to Jeff for doing this yesterday for me after just chatting about how it'd be so nice to have something like this. We talked earlier about the Ask.Puppet Labs Q&A site. You can see who some of the top participants there are. We talked about Jeff McEwen earlier because he's doing a lot of the work with the community. He was, along with Eric and a few others, really instrumental in getting this set up and getting the initial batches of questions posted and getting this running. And then Lee Lauder's also been extremely active in the Ask site. He's been actually doing a lot of the moderation and maintenance for the site, which has been kind of cool. So I like to see community members actually stepping up and doing some of that. IRC activity for the month. This is kind of fun. This is ranked based on the number of lines posted, but it also, the tool that we use pulls out just a random quote, which in some cases can be pretty funny because you have no control whatsoever of what your random quote is. Yeah, so it's kind of fun. And then I also have a whole bunch of charts, and I'm not going to go through those in a ton of detail, but you can see, with followers on Twitter, whatever, likes on Facebook. And where we have little bumps, I try to explain those. So the number of likes on Facebook, there was a Scobalizer interview of Puppet at the OpenStack conference. And that had a big bump in the number of likes on Facebook for some reason. We also have a lot of data gathering anomalies. The scripts that we're using to gather the data are a little brittle, and I need to go back and actually even out some of these, because you'll see this is a common theme throughout the rest of the metric slides are my data gathering anomalies. But this is members of the Puppet users list. You can see it continues to grow pretty rapidly. Members of Puppet Dev, same data gathering anomaly. More data gathering anomalies for IRC users, and then you can see, you see different things. So this is, the reason the IRC looks like this is weekends. So on the weekend it dips down, and then the weekend dips up, and then down on the weekend, and then up. So the IRC, the computer almost slid off. It's very aerodynamic. And then you can see the holiday lull as well in IRC. Number of accounts in Redmine, so these are people who sign CLAs or submit bugs. Number of users on Forge. This is not technically users, it's actually number of accounts on the Forge. Lots of people use the Forge without ever creating an account because you don't need an account to download modules. Number of modules on Forge, again, the data gathering anomaly is actually when they were in the process of switching over to the new Forge. And apparently our scripts counted a bunch of stuff twice, I'm guessing is what happened there. Number of forks of Puppet, you can actually see when we did a triage-a-thon, you can see that the forks of Puppet obviously increased as everyone forked it so that they could work on the code. People watching Puppet continues to grow up. We have, these are open issues in Redmine. We have, you can see where the platform team was formed, you can see a triage-a-thon, and then it continues to go up with another anomaly. Open pull requests. This is kind of an interesting one. So there have been a number of triage-a-thons, pull request sprints. I was talking to Andy about this earlier, and I've been talking to Jeff about it as well. I need to measure something a little bit different because I think the number of open pull requests isn't a particularly good representation of some of the work that Jeff has been doing, because a big part of why this chart has been going up here is because Jeff is very focused on pull requests, and now people have a little more confidence that their pull request is actually going to get merged. So we're getting a ton of new pull requests, which makes it look like Jeff is focused on pull requests and doing squat, which I happen to know is not the case. He sits right next to me. Works very hard on pull requests. But we have all sorts of people doing this. So we're looking at finding some other ways to measure it, like the time it takes us to merge a pull request, or comparing the open pull request to the closed pull requests. And then there's also, you can also see where the PE team added a bunch of, so we've been working in PE on adding support for AIX, and you can see a huge spike when they started contributing all of that code back into Puppet. Again, even though a lot of people on the enterprise team are focused on the enterprise product, they still contribute their code back to Puppet for the stuff that it makes sense to put in the open source project. So that's pretty important. Community plans. So I talked about all this stuff. I want to do a lot of work to improve the metrics. So right now I took what we had and we got it out there, and I added a few things. But there's a lot we can do with metrics, I think, and do a better job of measuring the things that are going to be meaningful, as opposed to measuring the things that I can easily gather data for, which is what the metrics are right now. So I'm going to work on that 2013. We're going to get that new CLA app launched so that it's easier both for people to sign the CLA and then for us to actually use that. One of the other things, I didn't talk about this at all, but one of the other things that I want to work on is doing more of a unified login and profile across a lot of the different tools that we have. It's not going to be possible for everything. But when I was at Intel and I was working on the Migo project, we actually had a single sign-on across MediaWiki. We even had our mailing lists kind of integrated into it, where you could log on to Drupal and you could manage your mailing list subscriptions. The Drupal login was part of that. We had our Bugzilla login. So we had ways to tie all of that together. I think on the back end for Migo, we were using the Drupal logins and then tying everything into it. We did that on another project. When I was on the Tizen project, we did it with Atlassian's Crowd. We used to integrate a lot of the logins across various systems. So I'm going to look at doing some of that as well. It'd be really nice if we could have kind of a main community profile for each person, where you can see that, the guy that is answering a whole bunch of questions on ask.puppelabs.com is the same person that wrote these, 10 great modules, and he's also the person who, has been doing something with the code base. It'd be nice to be able to have visibility into more of that. So that's a big project, though. I have to figure out how to do that. But I am going to work on that this year. And better recognition for community members. We're actually going to launch a kind of a community member of the month thing, so you can nominate people who you think have done something really awesome within the community. I think we're going to kick that off in February. We also have, as you saw, lots and lots and lots of Puppet camps coming up. We actually want to do 25 or more of them this year. Which is a lot of work. We're kind of without an events manager right now, which is why I've kind of picked up the Puppet camps, mainly because no one else can do it. But hopefully we'll get a lot more of these later in the year once we actually have an event manager to work on them. I'd rather hang out with the community and do community stuff with developers rather than worry about catering and locations for Puppet camps. But they're important. I can't get you all in one place if somebody isn't figuring out the logistics. Whoops. I also want to get more people starting user groups. We talked about that earlier. And I also want to grow the askpuppelabs.com site. So I think we started this and a lot of people don't really know that it exists. And I would like to change that. We're also hiring. We have a whole bunch of positions open. They're all in Portland, but we're pretty flexible about relocation, depending on the position and the case that it is. Portland is a great place to live. I have a number of reasons here on the bottom of the slide. Great beer, good coffee, awesome food, mountains, ocean. So think about it. Lots of positions open. There are lots of ways to contribute. We have all of our docs are in GitHub repositories, and you can submit a pull request against our documentation. So if there's a chunk of documentation that you think is not robust enough, you can actually fix that. It's not that hard. I've contributed stuff to our docs already. And it's just like contributing anything else to Puppet. We have the Ask site, the mailing lists. A great way to contribute back to the community is to answer other people's questions. Or, ask your own questions. There's a pretty good chance that somebody else probably has the same question, and then as you're starting to use Puppet more and more, you can help other people who are very new to Puppet. It's a great way to help. We want to actually get more people involved in bug triage as well. And if you go to docs.puppetlabs.com in the community section, there's actually a document that Eric Sorensen wrote, which is all about bug triage and how you can effectively do bug triage for Puppet projects. So we have a whole kind of a whole how-to about that. So that's a good way to contribute. Contribute code, contribute modules, we talked a lot about that, and just a note that we have hired an awful lot of people out of the community. So if you're interested in maybe someday working at Puppet, a great place to start is by actually contributing as an open source contributor. You can learn more. This is almost my last slide. I'm almost done. We have lots of URLs, the metrics. I just posted a whole bunch of links. There's my contact information, IRC, Twitter, email. I'm not hard to find. With that, I'm going to do one more thing. We have, so we have a new book, which I don't have with us, but we have Puppet Types of Providers, which is a new book that Dan Bodie and Nan Liu just wrote. So this was just released during the Christmas holidays. Oh, look, and Rob has one. So hold it up. So that's brand new. A lot of people missed it because it actually came out during Christmas. So I just want to highlight the fact that there is a new book. We brought copies of Pro Puppet that we were going to give away. How many people have been using Puppet for less than a month? Oh, okay, so let's, I didn't think it would be quite that many. We don't have that many books. How many books do we have? 5? We have 5 books. How many people have been using Puppet for less than a month and you really, really need help and you don't already own Pro Puppet? Okay, so there's still a few. We're gonna keep your hands up, keep your hands up. We'll randomly pick 5 of our favorite people who are easy to get to, I think. The other thing I'm going to mention, and we're not going to hand deliver them, but we actually do have some more t-shirts. So we didn't give all of them away. I am not taking them with me. I'm going to be here in Europe for 3 weeks. I'm not dragging t-shirts around. So if you didn't get one, take one. If you got the wrong size, take one.
You need a t-shirt, get.
If you want to give one to someone. So we have a couple of minutes while the next presenter gets set up. So, and not just these, we have a box of t-shirts. We have lots of women's t-shirts, so I'm going to talk about this for a second. So there are 3 of us here that I've found, which is not that many, considering there are at least 200 people at this conference. So if you know other women who are, sisters, kids, significant others who work in technology, get them interested in Puppet, make them sysadmins, I don't know, something. But we gotta get more women at the conferences. As a result, if you would like to take a t-shirt for your girlfriend, sister, daughter, we have more women's t-shirts here. Yes. Friend, yes. It does not have to be a relative or a significant other. But anyways, take these t-shirts because I'm not taking them back with me. With that, I am done. And the next person on the agenda is, Alessandro is going to talk about testing and playing with Puppet in the playground. So thank you. And for the one more thing. Sorry, for the afternoon speakers or people who are speaking later in the day, we've had some issues with Chris's computer. Everybody else has been good. But if you want to come down during a break and test your computer with the AV system, I would really appreciate that because it makes us less stressed out if we know things are going to work. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alessandro. Thank you.